All right, the history of punching. Now, I'm not saying like punching somebody in the face. I'm talking about the history of punching into heavy matted vegetation for bass. Now, this is an advanced form of flipping. So we're not talking about the basics of flipping or the history of flipping. I think it's well established that the father of flipping is D. Thomas from out there in California, Dave Glebe, and a handful of other guys out there that really put flipping on the map in, like, I don't even know, I think it was early 80s. It was way back as far as, you know, like modern bass fishing is concerned. They were out there just crushing it, figured out how to get close to the cover and be able to put their bait into that heavy cover area very easily and quickly. They invented that flipping technique. So even beyond flipping, I'm talking about punching. Now, I've been tournament bass fishing for over 20 years, so since about the year 2000, I've been traveling all over the country and talking with different people, fishing different tournaments, Bassmaster, FLW, whatever. So I've gotten exposed to a lot of different techniques, and over the years I've met a number of people and been able to kind of piece together the history on a frontline level. So that's what I was going to talk more about today, is the history of punching. Now, that is getting into those heavy matted vegetation areas where really no other technique can even get into. We're talking about stuff that might even be so thick you can't throw a frog on top of because it's just too far out of the water. Like your frog won't even get to the water. Hyacinths, a lot of dead matted vegetation that's kind of pushed up into areas. I mean, it's too hard of a surface to even get a bait to fish come through. You have to get a heavy weight. We're talking, a 1 ounce, ounce and a half, even a 2 ounce weight. And everything's been, this is like the refined version. This is not the history lesson yet. This is the refined version of kind of where everything has gone. This is the Missile Baits D-Bomb. It's what I flip a lot, but there's a bunch of different flipping baits that there's a lot of specialized punching flipping baits that you can find on the market. But that is, kind of what it's gotten refined to now, as far as these longer rods, 7-11, longer, heavier action rods, counterbalanced rods like this rod. It's gotten refined to the point to where it's almost a mainstream technique. But the history goes back. The first time I was ever exposed to a big weight, and I went back in the back and I looked through my old stuff and I could not find them anywhere. Somewhere I'll find them one day, and I'll have to maybe do an update to this. But I found these big 1.5 ounce lead weights that are shaped just like these flipping weights. All of your flipping weights that are now have that taper to them, because when they go through the cover, for whatever reason, they get through easier. They're not shaped like the old school bullet weight. They're shaped like this tapered weight. They all came back from the first one I ever saw was this lead weight. It was they had an ounce, 1.5 ounces. I think they even had 2 ounce weights. And it was from a guy down in Florida that guided on Lake Rodman. His name was Sam Aversa. Sam was the first person I've ever seen, heard, whatever. If you can look back on Bassmaster records, he had big fish. At least one day that I can remember, I think it was almost an 11-pounder. He caught on Rodman, punching that big weight, because he was a guide on Rodman. He knew where those big fish lived, and he knew that they lived up under that cover, and there was only one way to get to them, because you couldn't, in the tournaments, you couldn't throw those shiners out there in front of the edges of the bulrushes and that big heavy matted vegetation stuff. You couldn't do that. You had to get over in there where those fish were and put something in front of their face. So believe it or not, what he started out punching into that matted up, it was mostly matted up hydrilla that was there back in the, I guess, 90s, 80s, 90s, whenever he started doing this. And he was flipping a dingling. And I'm not talking about what you're probably thinking about, but if you know what a zeta bait and a dingling is, it is a paddle tail a skinny paddle tail worm. Very popular in Florida for a zillion years. And guys, this is like the precursor to the Zoom speed worm, if you didn't know that. But yeah, the Zeta bait dingling, you could take it and people would Texas rig it and fish it like, just like a regular wood worm, or you can reel it and that paddle tail would kick, kind of like a speed worm. And then they figured out that you could cut part of that paddle, like a ultra vibe speed worm is now, and it would kick like that, and it would have even more thump. But yeah, that's what he was punching under those big hydrilla mats, because Lake Rodman used to be just covered with hydrilla. It would be deep hydrilla, and that's where those big ones lived. And there was really no other way to kind of effectively fish for them. So Sam was one of the first people I've ever heard of that was actually having a big 1 ounce weight, and he made these. He made these weights, and I think he sold them under the Penetrator brand, if I'm not correct. And then he even searched out, because he knew it was going to be a big deal. Right when tungsten started coming out on the market, he searched out a source to be able to get big 1 ounce tungsten weights. And since he had already kind of refined the shape, now kind of all of the tungsten punching weights and the heavy flipping weights have that taper. I mean, this was, I'm telling you, it's Sam Aversa's deal as the first person I ever saw with weights like that. And then, everybody kind of realized that that's the kind of the deal for that heavy punching, was to have that tapered weight. And so he was kind of the first one to do that. But then, we all know that long skinny worm is really not effective when you're anywhere around vegetation that's coming up out of the water. We're talking about bulrushes with stuff matted up in there, or when we've got reeds with a bunch of junk matted up in there, or even hyacinths that has live hyacinths. You can't get that longer worm is going to want to stick to that vegetation, and you're not going to be able to get it down through there. So people started going with these smaller craws and crawdaddies and that kind of stuff. Well, they figured out when the cold fronts hit in Florida, which happens every winter when most of the tournaments are down there, they figured out that a little teeny tiny bait behind that big 1 ounce, ounce and a half, 2 ounce, whatever weight, that got down through the thickest stuff, because when it got cold, that's where those Florida bass went. They went up under those hyacinths, that thick matted stuff, and they started flipping with these little teeny, this is a fire claw. And I can't even remember the guy's name that made them. Somebody, I'm sure you're going to hit it up in the comments. I can't think of the guy's name. It's on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, it was down there. That was around the St. Johns River, kind of the same area where Sam Aversa is really, pushing a lot of that technique back in the day. They came out with this, and I don't know who designed it or who really kind of put it on the map first, but this became kind of the staple whenever it gets really cold down in Florida. This was the deal, that Allen's fire claw, and man, a lot of tournaments were won on that little teeny tiny bait, and I'm talking like 8 and 10 pound largemouth eating that little teeny tiny bait. Kind of a weird deal, but for some reason when it gets real cold down there, those fish don't want to do anything, and that little teeny tiny craw is the only thing that they would really even eat. And going back to some of my first events during cold fronts in Florida, I remember guys like even our Missile Bait's own Chad Morgan Taylor, like something clicked with him right away in the whole punching deal, because he right away got it. Terry Scroggins, lifelong Florida guy, he got it. And I remember, I was struggling to catch 3, 4, 5 bites during these cold fronts in a day, and I talked to Terry, and he was like, yeah, I caught a whole bunch. I was like, how many bites do you have? He's like, I don't know, 80 or 100. And I thought he was completely full of crap. I thought he was totally lying, but I already knew Terry, and I knew that he was not a BSer, and he could back it up. And sure enough, he finished in the top 5 in the tournament, and so did Morgan Taylor. But they were punching these little type craws into those dead hyacinths down in, I think it was Okeechobee. So just, the history of this, that was, big eye opener for me to be able to see that. And the only Bassmaster tournament that I've won The only one I've won was punching deep hydrilla, and I kind of stumbled into the right area the first day of the tournament. I got a couple bites in there in practice. So the California Delta, once the punching the word started to get out, those guys out west knew how to flip. And so they just started putting on bigger weights. And the California guys really have taken punching and made it mainstream, in my opinion, because punching is a big deal in Florida for a couple months. It's not the deal year round. You can punch almost year round and catch them really well in California out on the Delta. So those guys took the technique, in my opinion, kind of made it mainstream, kind of made it to where you can do it almost anywhere there's matted vegetation and the fish up under them. Shoot, even last year in June on Lake Gunnersville, our Elite Series event was won basically punching, basically doing what we're talking about. He had a big heavyweight, and I think it was a brush hog or something, going down through there and winning. He won the tournament. Blew it out, just crushed them. Big weights, big bags, and that's what lives under those deep matted vegetation areas, and that's why punching has become mainstream. Hell, with missile baits, we've gotten with Ish. Ish is hands down one of the best punchers on tour. He's won more money than about anybody I know punching heavyweight on the major tours. And he's buddies out west with some of those guys that are just totally dialed in and have been for a long time. Bub, Tosh, it goes on and on out there. But he's designed his own hook. He's taken our D-bomb, and he's got we got the weights in there that go along with it. Bobber stops, hold directions, how to do it. Because there's a lot of beginners, a lot of people that don't even really aren't too serious, and this is like one of our best selling kits. So that it's just crazy to me to how in 20 years we've gone from basically a handful of dudes, maybe even like one dude basically kind of discovering the whole punching thing and starting to put it on the map, to 20 years later it's a mainstream to where people are picking up a punching kit and going out there and catching fish on it. But it's a really cool and it's a really fun technique, and you almost have to have somebody go out there and show you. But now with videos, you can just watch it and kind of see how it's done. You watch a bunch of videos on it. I've got a punch box that has only punching weights in it. It's everything from 3/4 of an ounce up. That's all I keep in this one box. And this one little box right here, it weighs like 5 pounds. It weighs a lot, but that goes into my boat whenever I go anywhere where I think I might want to punch. And this rod right here goes with me wherever I might want to go that I'm going to be punching. I keep a rod with, it's actually an Icon punch rod, counterbalanced so it doesn't feel super overbearing, braided line. But that's just kind of crazy how far that punching has gone in basically 20 or so years. But that's kind of like the history of punching right there in a nutshell. But I'll tell you one other story. But around that time that I talked about Scroggins doing well in that tournament and Morgan Taylor really starting to just kind of become a deal, mainstream kind of deal. At the time, I was rooming with Russ Lane, now fishes the BPT, MLF stuff. Russ and I were rooming together, and he and I were both like, we got to figure this out. This is a big deal. We're getting our brains beat in because we are not good at it. We don't know how to do it. We went from a tournament on Okeechobee up to Lake Kissimmee in Florida. We went from one cold front week to another cold front week. And he and I said, you know what, let's go out together and figure out how to set the hook. Because we kind of knew the type of matted stuff to look for. We started to develop that. We knew we had all the right kind of tackle, the right kind of line, the right kind of hooks, the right kind of weights, the right kind of baits, all that kind of stuff. But we were losing fish. Our hookup ratios were terrible, all that kind of stuff. And we needed to get it dialed in. So we had heard that you don't set the hook. With a Texas rig, pitching it in a laydown with a 1/4 ounce weight, the fish bites, you plant them. You fluorocarbon, mono, whatever. The way we grew up, you just jack them as hard as you can and try to get their heads coming up out, and that's a very effective way to do it. That ain't the deal on punching. I'll just tell you that right now. That is not the deal, punching. Russ and I went out. The conditions were perfect for punching. He and I went out, and it was in the number of bites we had together that day were in the 30s. I think it was like 36, 38, something like that. And Russ and I landed every single bite that we got that day, and we never set the hook on one fish. Never technically dropped the rod and cracked them. We never did that. We'd throw in there, and every time we got bit, we had that braid, we could feel them. We would just start reeling. You know, with the left hand or right hand, we would just start reeling. We'd get a bite, like, oh, there he is, and we'd start reeling. The rod would load up, and next thing you know, the fish is wiggling, and then you just keep reeling. The fish comes through the hole. We caught every single fish. I don't think we lost a single bite that whole day. It was really an eye-opening experience, but that just kind of shows you how far we've come in that many years about how punching is. It's one of my stories about learning how to punch, learning how to set the hook properly, and all that kind of stuff. But pretty wild. So that's the history of punching. If you have anything out there that you want to contribute to the history of punching, please drop it down there in the comments. I would like to learn it and know a little bit more and become a little more adept at the full comprehension of the history of punching for bass. And I think it's a lot of fun. And if you're not used to it or have never done it before, and you have that type of cover in your area, then by all means, please pick up the right tackle and go out there and go punching. It is a lot of fun to catch fish like that. And if you have any other suggestions of histories of certain techniques, please drop them down there in the comments. I'll try to bring them to you at a later date. Thanks.